All right, we have Stephen Beardsley from DW Business with us to talk about some of the big business stories of the day. The first one, Donald Trump has lifted sanctions on a number of companies that are linked to a Russian oligarch, Oleg Deripaska. That actually includes the JSC Power Company and the aluminum giant Rusal. Now, Oleg Deripaska is an ally of Russian President Vladimir Putin. He's also being investigated in the U.S. as part of Robert Mueller's probe into alleged collusion between Moscow and President Trump's campaign in 2016. The US Treasury Department said the decision to remove sanctions was made because Deripaska no longer controls the companies. Critics, including some Republican lawmakers, don't agree with that assessment. All right, Stephen, so let's talk about these sanctions that have been lifted. Why were they there, and what does it mean that they're gone now?
Right, so it's a little complicated. There's a lot going on here, but basically these sanctions were part of a list of sanctions that were put in place in April 2018, and they were in response to what was considered Russian malign activity, and that included the election interference in 2016 and their activities in eastern Ukraine and Crimea. Deripaska was one of 7 oligarchs that are very close to Putin who were sanctioned as part of this, and Rusal was one of the companies. Basically, what it does is it blocks his assets, and it blocks Rusal from dealing in U.S. dollars, which basically kills their business because everything goes with U.S. dollars. But that has a critical consequence, which is Rusal is the world's 2nd largest aluminum producer. So that was going to send shockwaves through world supply lines. And the U.S. quickly heard about that after they imposed the sanctions from allies across Europe, for example, that said this is really going to be disruptive. And so weeks later, they came back and they said, maybe we can work out a deal. And that's where we are today. They've delayed and delayed and delayed putting this into effect, but now they announced it 30 days ago. It's gone into effect today. And basically, as the piece said, it removes his control, which he had in a holding company, from the actual company itself, removes his voting rights, or at least shrinks them, and then basically allows a lot of changes on the board of directors, things like that.
That sounds like a compromise, but there is criticism then for these sanctions being lifted. Why?
Right, it's a little complicated, but basically through this deal and the way that he moves some of his shares, he actually gains hundreds of millions of dollars of his debt are basically wiped off, which means he basically gains that money. So, I mean, he's making a considerable deal from this, and actually some of the shares that have been distributed, his shares that have been taken, have ended up going to his allies and to his family. And while they don't have voting rights, they're still going to make a decent amount of money off of the dividends from these shares. So in a way, it's sort of a sweetheart deal for him, you could say, if you're a critic. But also, obviously, his connection to the Mueller investigation. That's really been a hot topic. And he does have a role, obviously, with Paul Manafort, who has been convicted recently. So there's a lot sort of going on here, but that's where the criticism comes in.